Let me go interview 50 of the smartest financial people on earth and say, is the game still winnable? Because it looks rigged. And it is in some ways, but it's still totally winnable if you know what you're doing. So I want to tell you what I think is the holy grail of investing.
Wow. So a regular person, anybody can do this now.
That's correct.
You do. You go to the best of the best and ask them questions. And so I'm curious to learn more about this.
Well, actually, I hadn't written a book in 20 years back when 2008 happened, and we went through the world financial crisis, and I had, my billionaire friends were stressed out, and my barber was. It didn't matter who you were. Everybody was affected by it then because the government didn't give you money like they did during this last round we had with COVID. So at that time, I finally, after 2 years when nothing happened, we punished the people that almost destroyed the financial system by giving them more of our money. My answer was, let me go interview 50 of the smartest financial people on earth and say, is the game still winnable? Because it looks rigged. And it is in some ways, but it's still totally winnable if you know what you're doing. And I figured I can go from the best to the best. I kept bumping into people that the majority of which are not where they want to be financially. Their goals are not on target. And now inflation is really eroding that even more for people. And so when I was talking to Ray Dalio, he became a good friend over the years, over the last decade or so. And I was asking one time, instead of all the principles we've talked about, if there was a single principle that would be the most important investment principle of someone to know if they're going to succeed, what is it? And he said, Tony, I've struggled with this for over a decade. And he goes, I want to tell you what I think is the holy grail of investing. So that's the title of the book, comes right from him. And I said, what is it? He goes, well, everybody wants bigger returns, but bigger returns usually require more risk, and more risk can keep you from getting the returns. It's just this bad cycle. He said, but, everyone knows the power of diversification. Diversification is the only free lunch. Markowitz won the Nobel Prize for it. He goes, but very few people understand how to apply it. And he said, I'll tell you what I have found out. This is the principle. If you can find 8 to 12 uncorrelated investments that you believe in, you reduce your risk by 80% and get the same upside or better. There's nothing like it. And so I remember when he told it to me, I got excited, wrote it down, and then I started to go work on it. And, you find it's not easy to get things that are not correlated. The obvious ones you'd say aren't correlated are stocks and bonds, right? If stocks are designed, they're going to go up. Bonds are going to be safety when they go down. But of course, in 2022, they both went down. 2008, they both went down. And if we had more time, I can show you it's happened over and over again. So that's not a good solid strategy because that's not going to protect you during down times. So how do you find 8 to 12 uncorrelated investments? Well, you have to turn to private investments, private alternative investments. I'm talking about private equity, private credit, private real estate. And so I thought, the one gift I have in my life at this stage is access. What if I interviewed 13 of like a baker's dozen of the greatest institutional, or greatest, I should say, private equity investors in the world and found out what they do? And I was blown away. As blown as I was by the first 50 people I interviewed, the Ray Dalios, the Carl Icahns, Warren Buffetts, et cetera, I have to say I respect all those people immensely. I have a greater affinity for these men and women because they have funds that are $20 to $100 billion funds, and they're consistently producing 20% compounded for decades. Some of them 30% compounded for decades. Wow. And the average investor can't even think of those, wouldn't even believe it. But of course, for decades, if you're a big pension fund, right? If you're a big financial institution, if you're the ultra wealthy, you've got access to these things. And so first, I just wanted to figure out how to get my own 8 to 12. And I remember one day I was at JP Morgan holds an alternative investments conference once a year, and you have to have $1 billion net worth as a minimum to get in. And I was speaking. I wasn't a billionaire yet, so I'm speaking. But right before me was Ray Dalio, and somebody asked him the same question, and he gave the same answer, 8 to 12. And these billionaires, everyone had not written a note all morning, and every head went down and wrote it like crazy. It's so simple. But then how do you find it? Well, when you go interview these guys, you discover that they have built machines. They're not trying to find alpha by finding the right timing and just the right price. They create alpha, and they do it by adding more value. The reason I wrote the book is 2 things happen. One is more people can participate now. I'm sure the government actually classifies whether you can access these or not. The best investments in the world are limited to the wealthiest people. How insane is that? And I've argued about this forever. And just a few months ago, the House and Congress agreed. And they came up with a new law, and it was bipartisan. And it was to say this: you could have inherited your money That doesn't mean you're a sophisticated investor, or you might be a good business person, but that doesn't make you a great investor. Why should someone have to have that amount of money, $1 million minimum if you're going to be, a accredited investor, or 200, not counting your house, or 200,000 income, or 300,000 per couple is the standard right now. And they said, we think you should be able to take a test so you understand what you're getting into. And if you pass the test, you should be an accredited investor. So they passed that law. Senators now picked it up. In the next 90 days, they think that'll pass bipartisan as well. That'll change the game. But it used to be only 1% of the people were accredited. Now it's 1 out of 5 families that are accredited investors. So I was like, okay, I want to do this. But then there's one other problem, right? And I'm sure you may have experienced this as well. You know a lot of people. I know a lot of people. The very best investors in the world, their funds are closed out in a heartbeat. It's like if you want to buy, one of the new, special purpose Ferraris, the SP2, it's $4 million and you can't even buy one because they're all pre-sold, to all the other Ferrari dealers. Well, it's the same way when you look at these people. These are the best of the best. Now, before I explain something to you, let me show you one other thing. If you want to know how valuable private equity investments are and where they should be in your asset allocation, the wealthiest people on average have 46% of their money in alternative investments, private equity, private credit, et cetera. And they only have 29% in the public markets. Still need the public markets for liquidity, but that's a big difference. That's why they're as profitable as they are. Why? Because they know something you probably don't know. Not you, but people don't know. Mm-hmm. And that is this. If you look at the S&P 500, you bought the index, which is common for people to do today. Great way to simplify your investing, and does pretty well. In fact, for 35 years, it's averaged 9.2% compounded. So for readers that aren't used to this, think of that as doubling your money every 8 years. That's pretty cool. However, if you weren't dealing with the guys I'm dealing with in this book, if instead you're dealing with average private equity has been 14.2%. Imagine you're making 50% more money per year compounded. Compounding is where you get wealthy. So let me give you a number for that. If you had $1 million and put it in the stock market and you forgot about it, 35 years later, it's worth 26 million. $1 million in the same time period in private equity is worth 139 million. Or you could say $100,000, right? You're now worth 2.6, or $100,000, you're worth 13.9 million. It's mind-boggling. And in the last 35 years, every stock market in the world has underperformed average private equity. So now let's talk about access for a second. So I got some access. You probably got some access, but it's a little sliver, right? Because it all gets eaten up. And you only get access if you know the right people and you got enough money. So one day I was lamenting about this to a friend of mine who used to be a partner with Paul Tudor Jones and formed his own firm, very successful financial guy. I was like, I got access. I shouldn't complain, but the numbers are so small. It's like, it's not where I want to be. And he said, Tony, you've done so much for me. I'm going to clue you in on where I put most of my money. Now, this guy's incredibly successful, so I'm leaning forward on this one, right? Tell me, right? He said, there's this firm in Houston, Texas called CAS. And when he said Houston, Texas, my brain got scrambled. I'm like, not New York, not Connecticut, not London, not Singapore, Houston? He goes, Tony, they're outside the bubble. And here's what they've done. Instead of fighting to try and get some sliver of one of these funds, he said they've taken billions of dollars, they've locked arms as investors, and bought in giant pieces, small pieces, but giant numbers across the biggest private equity firms in the world. Here's what that means. When you invest in private equity as an investor, you're called a limited partner. The general partner is the owners of the fund. That's the CEO, the C-suite, those individuals. Well, they charge you 2% a year while your money is tied up for 5 or 10 years, depending on what kind of situation you're in. So they're guaranteed a huge sum of money, whether they perform or not. So they make their 2 and 20. Well, when you're a partner, you get the 2 and 20. You're literally side by side with them. You're not being charged that, you're getting it. And you get many vintages, meaning not one fund, you get every fund they own. The funds they did in the past were under low inflation. The funds they're doing now under high inflation. The future funds they're going to do. So you get diversification across time. And if the fund ever gets sold, by the way, when they go from 1 to 2, their cost doesn't go through the roof. It's a small cost change, right? And when they ever get sold, they get sold for a multiple. You make them multiple on the business. It is my single favorite investment. I have 65 private equity firms that I have a piece of. The Vistas, the Veritases, the Starwoods, the NCAPs, the biggest ones in the world. So this is the kind of thing that's available now. And that's why I wrote this book, to show people how they can actually do it, how an average person can do this now.
Wow. So the regular person, anybody can do this now.
That's correct.
Hey everyone, I am Ryan Hawk, host of the Learning Leader Show and owner of this YouTube channel. I just learned a fascinating stat, and that is 95% of people who view our videos are not yet subscribed. And so, if you'd like to ensure you're seeing all of the amazing interviews we're going to do, and we have some good ones coming up, then smash that subscribe button. I know everyone says that, but it's critical to ensure you're seeing what we have coming up. So I thank you for viewing, and I look forward to you being a part of this learning leader journey moving forward. Thank you so much.